Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, today we have a very special guest, one of the great champions of the pro-life movement, who's in the United States Congress, and he's been there since he was 27 years old. He represents the 4th District of New Jersey, and he's been in Congress for 35 years, much of that time championing pro-life causes and human rights causes, not only here in America, but around the world. Well, welcome, Congressman Chris Smith.
Brendan, thank you so very much for having me on, and it's good to see you again.
Congressman Smith, could you tell us a little bit about what has been happening with the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which was supposed to be passed in the House of Representatives on January 22nd, 2015? Well,
the good news is that we're very close to debating and voting on the legislation, and it is really landmark legislation. As you said, it's the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, and it would bar the performance of abortions in most cases after the 20th week, when the experts tell us beyond any reasonable doubt that the unborn child can feel pain. As a matter of fact, not just some pain, but excruciating pain, including from the procedures like dismemberment, where the child is literally torn from legs and arms and then finally decapitated. For a portion of that time before the baby actually dies, he or she feels every one of those knife attacks. And so the pain-capable legislation would say at least at 20 weeks, many of us believe that the idea may and the concept of pain may clearly precede that. We will make most of those abortions not permissible under United States law. So it's a very, very significant step, and it builds on, frankly, the groundswell after the partial birth abortion ban, when many people realized how hideous it was to literally half-born a child suck his or her brains out and then continue the operation by collapsing the skull. And the other side defended all of that as choice. Killing a baby is just mere choice rather than the destruction of a fragile member of our family.
And do you see, because you're now involving the child in the discussion versus just a woman's choice, do you see it a winning argument for us, or something that can withstand court
Yes,
battles?
I do. Great question, Brendan. I do really believe that we will be able to sustain this in court. The partial birth abortion ban was ultimately ruled constitutional. Of course, who sits on that court? We believe, a fragile majority of probably 5-4. At least we hope we have it. So there's concerns that if Hillary Clinton, for example, were to secure the presidency, she would pack the court with litmus-tested extremists on abortion. And like we already have a few like that on the court put on there by Clinton and by Obama. So we would lose potentially many of the gains that have been made. All the reason why elections do matter, and who we put, especially in the White House, is of utmost importance.
Mm-hmm. And we've had I'm blanking on. I had on Donna Harrison a few weeks ago. She's the executive director of APLOG, and we were talking about how the Clinton administration used all the legerdemain, deceit, and bullying to rush through the RU-486 from France and the parent company in Germany all the way into the United States, and really forcing the abortion pill on America. And why was it that the George Bush, who was supposedly pro-life, why was it that his administration didn't overturn the Clinton administration bringing the abortion pill to America?
Oh, it's a great question, and regrettably, it's one of those issues that the president, in this case Bush, refused to embrace. And let's not forget that under Bill Clinton, his FDA commissioner, Kessler, I'll never forget it because I objected to it in floor comments on the House floor and in letters and op-eds and the like, literally went and practically begged the manufacturer of RU-46, which is really baby poison, to bring that product here to be used in the United States. And it was part of his first executive order, which was like an engraved invitation, and they did sham trials on it. Adverse events were not included, including some very serious adverse events. So it was all shrouded in politics by the Clinton administration and in extremism in terms of bringing this newest chemical abortion, this poison, to the United States. Judicial Watch did a fantastic job after being rebuffed repeatedly in trying to get information about the whole process employed by the Clinton administration. And they finally, through the Freedom of Information Act, secured huge numbers of documents, and it's all online if anybody wants to read it. Just put RU46 and Judicial Watch in. And in 2006, they discovered that there were a number of fatalities attributable to RU46, which has only increased over the years. In 2011, the FDA reported maybe as many as 14 American women died from this so-called ultra-safe abortion method, and of course, many hundreds of adverse events. I wrote President Michael Leavitt, who was then HHS Secretary for George Bush, and the head of the FDA back in '07, and tried orally and in comments made face-to-face to get a re-look at for RU46, and over the course of 8 years could never get that accomplished. My hope would be that a new president would say, women have died, all kinds of adverse bleeding, profound bleeding have been suffered by the women. There needs to be a reevaluation of a sham process that brought this baby poison to the United States. And, most people don't realize that RU46 is actually manufactured in the People's Republic of China, which, and there's real questions about safety, efficacy. We know that it almost always kills the baby, and certainly has killed some women, which is two horrible, horrible things. But it also comes through a group called Danco. It's not, none of the major pharmaceuticals in America were willing to engage in risk in bringing such a dangerous substance to the market. So this one product company was formed, and it's not even located here in the United States. So if anybody does sue, good luck with that. But it also raises real questions that I've asked the FDA about adverse events and reporting. When you have a large pharmaceutical like Merck or J&J, they are, no matter what it is that they do have mechanisms that hopefully capture problems that women or anyone's experiencing from any certain compound or drug. Can this group, Danco, do that? Really raises serious questions that have not been answered. And again, this is another one of the Bill Clinton legacies that unfortunately George Bush was unwilling to embrace.
Was it
embrace in terms of re-reviewing?
Was it because George Bush had people that surrounded him, like we had here in Massachusetts, a fellow by the name of Andy Card that became one of his right-hand man, and Karl Rove, or some of these other folks? Were they influencers that George W. Bush did not reverse this Clinton, I think, tragedy on bringing the abortion pill to America?
Well, Brendan, I'm not sure because, you never know why something doesn't happen. But we tried repeatedly, and again, I have the paper trail by way of a letter and requests that were made by me and by others, but I wrote several of these letters, and we just never got anywhere. It was like nothing happened. And, the abortion lobby shouldn't be that strong that they can prevent an analysis of the safety of a drug, especially when the data suggests that it is not safe for women. Women have died from it, and again, the damage it does to a child. The way it works, most people don't realize RU46 is actually two substances. The first actually denies the baby who is already in the womb the ability to get nourishment, so it starves the child to death first, and then the second compound brings on the expulsion of the now dead baby. And so it's And when you really analyze it and go beyond the shallow comments that are made about RU-46, it's a hideous drug. It doesn't cure, it doesn't protect, it just destroys the baby by starvation and then by expulsion from the womb.
Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding, actually, today, that this pain-capable, just to go back to that, that there's protests going on Capitol Hill as far as from the pro-life side of trying to get the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act passed. Does that really influence a person like John Boehner up on the Hill? Chris?
35 years, including the Republican leadership. Certainly Tip O'Neill and people, the Democrat speakers were awful, totally pro-abortion, which always baffled me. But Boehner and Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader McCarthy and the rest of the leadership team are extraordinarily pro-life. They do believe, they had already slated the pain-capable legislation, the pain-capable child legislation, for January 22nd. We already had a rule being debated on the floor when a few members of the Republican caucus objected to some of the language, which we've now been working through ever since. So, you don't put a bill on the floor and then remove it if you didn't run into a wall. So I am very confident that the debate and the vote on this landmark legislation, authored by Trent Franks, who's a great pro-life leader in the House, will be considered very, very, very soon.
I see. Well, now switching over to the international scene, there's an important vote coming up at the UN, I believe, and you had mentioned that it may bring a Roe versus Wade around the world. What's
sure.
that? Can you give us a little...
There's been moves. In 1994, I was part of the delegation, the most unwanted member of the Clinton delegation. The Republicans stood by me and made sure I got on it for the Cairo population control meeting. It was a little more than a week in Cairo, Egypt. Run under the auspices of the UN, presided over by the president of the International Planned Parenthood Federation based in London. His name was Fred Tsai, a Ghananese, a man from Ghana. Look how the deck is stacked. You got the head of Planned Parenthood running the UN meeting with the gavel in his hand. And the Clinton administration tried very hard to put an international right to abortion into the Cairo population control action plan. They tried the same thing at the Beijing Women's Conference. 1 year later, I co-led the delegation as the Republican for that one as well. And there was a pitched battle. The Holy See led the effort, backed by some of the Muslim countries, the Latin Americans, especially the Africa group as they're known as, and the bad language, or most of it, was excised out of the document. They have been trying ever since at every UN fora, whether it be the follow-ups to the Cairo or Beijing, and even summits for children and other meetings that take place at the UN, to inject reproductive rights into the language of the UN documents. Now, reproductive rights, when you ask some people, they say that doesn't mean abortion. But to the NGOs, the extremists, the pro-abortion crowd, and many of the delegates, it absolutely does mean abortion. And any ambiguity or lack of clarity means that they then, pummel foreign governments to legalize abortion based on what the UN now has told them to do. So there's Sustainable Development Goals coming up for consideration, and they currently have reproductive rights language. It has some softening language that goes with it, but it, in my opinion, doesn't do enough. So the concern is that every time you turn around, the Africans, the Latin Americans, because much of Latin America remains solidly pro-life, although some have socialists and leaders in place that do not agree with the pro-life agenda. So that's a very, very stiff challenge, like El Salvador. But the effort really is to make sure that these regional bodies, whether it be the African Union or the Organization for American States, and the biggest one of all, the United Nations, doesn't become the purveyors of abortion on demand. There's a group, Planned Parenthood, everybody knows it. They've done well over 7 million abortions in America alone. They lobby for abortion, from partial birth to abortion and all the other methods. I mean, they are probably the biggest organization in the world, and they have affiliates in every country of the world. They have a document called Vision 2020, and it's their nightmarish vision for unfettered access for abortion, no conscience rights, adolescents being able to get abortions without any kind of parental involvement, as well as with full funding by the government. So International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, is pushing this agenda all over the world, every day of the week, as is IPAS and all these other organizations. And our prayers really have to be with these developing countries especially, who love life. You know, I work on humanitarian issues all the time. I've written laws, the landmark law on combating human trafficking called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, to prevent modern-day slavery, sex or labor trafficking. I've written child survival, immunizations, oral rehydration therapy, all of these different bills and laws. Many of them are laws. I have a new one on global health initiative. You know, the greatest time of intervention in any of our lives is the first 1,000 days of life, from conception to the second birthday. And if proper nutrition is provided to mother and baby, both are exponentially safer, not just during the birth process, but for the next 25,000 days or more in that child's life, because immune systems are bolstered and the like. That's where the UN, that's where all of us need to be mobilizing to, at every turn, be affirming life and the magnificence of life, welcoming. You know, don't shred the welcome mat because you happen to be poor. And a lot of what these Sustainable Development Goals are centered around is combating poverty. Well, you don't combat poverty by killing the children of the poor. That is absolutely unacceptable and inhumane. And unfortunately for many people, that is a means to that end.
Well, do they, is the United Nations holding a cudgel or something over their heads that if you don't go along with this, we're not going to give you food, or we're not going to give you water, or we're not going to give you medicine? I mean, are they in effect bribing them?
Another great question. There's this whole concept of integrating the extremist abortion policies with that which is good and laudable, you know, clean water, nutritious food, and the like. And that immersion, that integration, is extraordinarily dangerous, especially when the World Bank, the IMF, donor countries like the United States and the European Union, you know, predicate their funding whether or not the country is moving in the direction of embracing the culture of death. And you know, President Obama has been and is you know, the worst offenders. You know, you got to remember, Wendy Sherman is the number 3 person at the U.S. Department of State. You see her picture every time there's a photo of John Kerry, the Secretary of State, negotiating with the Iranians on the nuclear deal. She is embedded in the State Department, very high position. She used to be the executive director of Emily's List, you know, the pro-abortion group that bundles money for Democratic women candidates who are strongly pro-abortion. That's what her job was. And Obama has embedded people throughout the entire administration who came right out of the abortion movement, and now they are sitting in positions of power and influence to promote that agenda. And, you know, my hope is that everyone wakes up to that fact so that they can, you know, you're not talking to some person who worked their way up through the Foreign Service, you know, and it really has, you're talking about pro-abortion organizations and their people, like I said, filling the ranks of important positions, gatekeeper positions at the state.
And now you're...
And Hillary Clinton, you know, when she made a speech, several of them, she talked about how groups like Planned Parenthood are her partners. that these are the go-to people for U.S. taxpayer funds. And certainly when she was Secretary of State, and it continues today, those organizations get huge amounts of money. Even domestically, like I said, I'm the prime author of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. One of the programs was a Health and Human Services program for refugees, trafficking victims. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops had the grant during the Bush administration, did a magnificent job, and that's just not my opinion. That's the opinion of the reviewers at HHS that were judging who gets the next grant. Well, Kathleen Sebelius, the HHS secretary, said that we will give special preference to the non-governmental organizations, to the applicants who will refer for abortions. Took it away from the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, who again provided tremendous, compassionate, and effective assistance to these trafficking victims, and gave it to groups that were willing to embrace the abortion agenda. That's happening every day in our government with taxpayer funding.
Wow, that's really something.
It's very something. And there are things that we don't even know what's going on. There's such a lack of transparency. We saw it with the Obamacare. President Obama came up to Capitol Hill, you recall, I know, Brendan, and said in 2009, under our plan, no funds will be spent for abortion. He put out an executive order to get the votes of pro-life Democrats who were wavering, because they wanted the Stupak Amendment, Stupak-Pitts, as it was known, named after Bart Stupak and Joe Pitts. And he did this executive order that said the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, as it's officially called, will abide by the Hyde Amendment. That was a big lie. Both of them were big lies. Today, over 1,000 Obamacare health plans pay for abortion on demand. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Treasury, pays insurance companies money every month for what they call it a subsidy, and they're buying abortion plans. That's exactly what the Hyde Amendment says you can't do. It says you can't fund a plan that includes abortion. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. And yet some of their supporters, recently the Washington Post took umbrage at myself and Congresswoman Fox when we brought this issue up and said, we get Pinocchios because we got it wrong. So I wrote an op-ed, which they carried at least online, and said, you don't know what the Hyde Amendment is. Here's what President Obama said. He would abide by the Hyde Amendment. Here's what the Hyde Amendment is, and here's how he's breaking it. It couldn't be clearer. It's like saying, the sun's not out when you're looking right at it. It was really unbelievable, in my opinion. And this president, the lie of abortion coverage parallels in terms of the big lie when he said, if you like your health care plan, if you like your doctor, you can keep it. Everybody knows that was a farce, too. So that's what we get from this administration. I have never seen anything like it. I've been in Congress 35 years. I've never seen anything like it. The lack of transparency and the lack of integrity. We're told things, and they're just not true.
Can I ask you,
yes.
These third-party payer insurance companies, is this a boon to the abortion industry? Because they're going to be reimbursed a lot more money than someone paying cash for an abortion out of their pocket, aren't they?
Well, I haven't seen any data on whether it be more or less, but the fact that it's subsidized based on other empirical data, we have found that, like with the Hyde Amendment on Medicaid funding for abortion, that when money is available to facilitate the destruction of the baby, there's a sizable percentage, some put it as high as 25%, of abortions that would not have occurred if that subsidy was not available. So, being very cynical, thinking about this, for the insurance companies not to have to pay the full birthing, all of the prenatal care, obviously the birth, and then a family member who will draw on health expenditures by an insurance company, even with the huge copays we've now all endured under Obamacare, it's cheaper, and I say this with unbelievable sadness, to include abortion in the health plan than not for the insurers. So, I think they have to do some soul searching, because when they include it in their plan, they are facilitating more abortions and more child deaths and more agony imposed upon the woman, because we know every abortion has 2 victims, 3 if there's twins, and that the mother is a victim and suffers, particularly psychologically. And Donna Harrison, as you mentioned before, she has done tremendous work, as have others, but she especially, on documenting the deleterious effects to women post-abortion, as well as to children, including children born subsequently, who have a higher percentage of being premature and low birth weight, particularly the younger they are, especially when it's a surgical abortion. And then the whole issue of the psychological impact, which so many have experienced, and the emotional trauma of that abortion. And you never hear that from the other side.
Right. Congressman Smith, we just have 1 minute left. And
sure.
Could you briefly tell us about the Global Brain Health Act that you were proposing?
Sure.
In the United States Congress?
I've introduced a bill, and I've worked on a number of health issues, including autism, hydrocephalic condition, and Alzheimer's, and I chair the caucuses for autism and Alzheimer's, for example. And what's lacking in our foreign health programs, our global health programs, is anything that really has to do with the issue of global brain health or brain health. On the we've worked with Cure International, and they have saved thousands of kids in Uganda, for example, with a very inexpensive intervention with kids who have water on the brain, hydrocephalic condition. And the conservative estimate is that there's about 300,000 children born with infectious-based hydrocephalic condition, and these kids die a horrible death. Their brains and their skulls actually expand significantly, and through this initiative, building on successes that have been made, many can be saved. We've worked with people like Ray Ruddy, who's been very active in trying to help these little kids, as well as Dr. Benjamin Worth from right up there in Harvard, who developed a method that is probably the most effective and safe method and inexpensive, and works in a situation where you don't have good medical backup. So it could be done in clinics with low resources. So it's a huge breakthrough, and I've had several hearings on it. And Dr. Worf, they also want to train up more neurosurgeons for Africa. There's a dearth of doctors in general, neurosurgeons in particular, in all of Africa. So this would be a capacity-building effort as well.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, and it's wonderful to hear that there's a new method other than the shunts that have been used.
No, that's exactly right, yes.
Have been used historically. Well, our time has come to an end, and it's been most informative. Thank you so much, Congressman Smith, for coming on the show today, and good luck with all these future endeavors, and we'll see you in Washington, D.C. sometime.
Brendan, thank you, and thank you so much for your work over these many years on the life issues.
Thank you. Well, we hope you learned a lot today about what's going on and what has gone on, both in America and internationally, with the battle and the ongoing battle between the pro-life and pro-abortion side. It's both here in America and worldwide, and it is a true war going on. Well, thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.